This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
All right, today we are going to tackle one of the biggest, most fundamental beliefs in the West. The idea that its philosophy, its entire way of thinking, all started back in ancient Greece. We're going to dig in and see how that story might be less of a historical fact and, well, more of a carefully built myth. You've definitely heard this idea before, and it was summed up perfectly by the philosopher Hegel. It's such a comfortable thought, isn't it? That there's this direct, unbroken family line stretching all the way from thinkers like Plato and Aristotle right down to us today. But what if it's not true? What if that whole homecoming feeling isn't a memory at all, but a story that was made up much, much later to serve a very specific purpose? That's the big question we're diving into. Okay, so to get into this, we first have to look at how Greek philosophy actually made its way into Western Europe. And here's the thing. It wasn't a slow, gentle inheritance passed down from generation to generation. It was more like the sudden arrival of a completely foreign set of intellectual tools. The first thing that should just jump right out at you is the gap. You see Aristotle's big ideas arrive in the 12th century, and they don't even come directly. They come through Arabic translations into Latin. But Plato and the original Greek texts, they don't really show up for another 300 years. That is a huge gap. And right away, that complicates this whole idea of one single tidy Greek beginning, doesn't it? So think about what this means. For literally hundreds of years, when people in the West talked about Greek philosophy, they were pretty much just talking about one guy, Aristotle. He gave them a whole system, a complete toolkit for logic, for science, for ethics. It basically became the operating system for the brand new universities. And Plato, he was practically a ghost. People knew his name, but more as a kind of mystical figure, not as a philosopher whose books you could actually sit down and read. So you've got to put yourself in their shoes. For these medieval thinkers, Aristotle wasn't some long-lost relative showing up at the door. His system was a brand new and honestly kind of alien piece of technology for the mind. It was a powerful import that completely changed the way they saw and analyzed the world around them. Okay, so that's Aristotle. But what about the rest of them? What about Plato? How did he finally show up on the scene? Well, for that story, we got to fast forward about 300 years to the Renaissance. It all kicks off with this one huge historical event, the fall of Constantinople in 1453. As the city fell, scholars from the Byzantine Empire fled for their lives, and many of them headed west to Italy. And they didn't come empty-handed. They brought their libraries with them, these priceless, original Greek manuscripts of Plato, of Aristotle, of so many others. For the first time, Western Europe had direct access to the source code. And you know, the reaction from the great thinkers of the Renaissance wasn't, "Oh, welcome home, our intellectual ancestors have returned." No way. It was more like an archaeological dig, like they had just unearthed King Tut's tomb. The buzz was all about these incredible, ancient, and, this is really important, non-Christian artifacts they had just discovered. They were seen as this amazing treasure from a totally lost world. And it's how they used these texts that is so telling. They didn't treat them like sacred family heirlooms. They used these Greek ideas as a weapon, really, a powerful resource to challenge and critique and reform the medieval world they were living in. It was a tool to build something new, not a tradition to be continued. So, if the medievals saw Aristotle as a foreign toolkit, and the Renaissance saw Plato as this incredible unearthed artifact, then who on earth turned this whole complicated, messy history into a simple story about a homecoming? Well, for the answer, we have to jump forward a few more centuries. The guy we can really point to, the main architect of this whole myth, is the 19th century German philosopher Hegel. He looked at all these jumbled pieces of history, and he didn't just report on them. He was like a movie director, taking all this raw footage and editing it into a single, clean story with a very clear beginning, middle, and end. So how did he do it? Well, his project was massive. He basically re-edited all of world history. First, he took great civilizations like China and India and kind of pushed them to the side, calling them prehistory. Then he declared that ancient Greece was the exact moment that reason, with a capital R, woke up and became aware of itself. And from there, he drew this perfect straight line through Rome, through Christianity, that ended up, and I'm sure this is just a coincidence, in his own German philosophy. It created this powerful sense of destiny, this feeling of an inevitable journey home. And let's be really clear about this. Hegel wasn't just getting his facts wrong. He knew the history was more complicated. This story he told was a deliberate, powerful move. It was a philosophical construction designed to make his vision of European history feel special, destined, and inevitable. He wasn't just telling a history, he was building a homeland for reason. Okay, so if you want the ultimate proof that this Western homecoming story is a construction, all you have to do is look at the society that actually had a direct, continuous link to ancient Greece, the Byzantine Empire.
And wow, the difference is just night and day. In the West, you have this rediscovery, an import, that arrives in a foreign language, Latin, so of course it felt new and strange. In the Byzantine Empire, it was a direct inheritance. They spoke Greek. It was their mother tongue. It felt ancestral, totally familiar. And this leads to a huge difference. The West gets guys like Thomas Aquinas, whose whole job was to stitch together this foreign Aristotle with Christian ideas. The Byzantines, they didn't need a Thomas Aquinas.
And why not? Simple. For them, there was no gap to bridge. The New Testament was written in Greek. Their religious leaders wrote in Greek. Their great philosophers were read in the original Greek. Imagine if the language of your science textbooks, your prayers, and the conversation you have at the market were all the same. That's what it was like for them. It was all one seamless world. And here's the beautiful irony, right? The one culture that could legitimately say, "We're coming home to Greek philosophy," never had to say it. They didn't need a homecoming story because, from their perspective, they had never left. But this leads to a huge, fascinating paradox. The Byzantines, the true heirs, they preserved Greek philosophy. They studied it, they cherished it. But they didn't use it to launch a scientific revolution. It was the outsiders, the importers in the West, who took this foreign toolkit and used it to spark a revolution that changed everything. All right, so after all this, you might be thinking, okay, interesting history lesson, but why does this actually matter? Well, it's about way more than just correcting some dates in a textbook. It gets at something much, much deeper. So on one hand, you've got the myth we're usually told, this clean, straight line, a beautiful, inevitable homecoming. And on the other hand, you have the messy reality. These tools that arrive in pieces, centuries apart, are seen as foreign artifacts, and then a story is written way after the fact to make it all look neat and tidy. And the takeaway here is, I think, really important. Look, pointing this out isn't about tearing down philosophy. Not at all. What it does is show us how cultures create their own foundational myths. It shows us that stories about where we come from are often less about getting the history right and more about creating a powerful sense of identity and purpose for ourselves right now. And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If this huge, foundational story about where reason comes from was basically fabricated, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other origins, what other stories we take for granted as simple fact should we be questioning too?
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.